I'm a social worker at heart, so this for me has been like, is something that is unexplainable. I pinch myself sometimes because I can't believe that, little Diana, right, from the project is the deputy speaker of the city council, and who the hell let me in?
Welcome to Uptown Voices. From Harlem to the Heights to the northern tip of Inwood, we're here to celebrate our people and together seek solutions for the difficult issues we're all confronting as neighbors. Regardless of what hood you represent, we share the same goal, creating the best community we can, somewhere to enjoy, where we can build our lives and raise our children. We want to thank 181 Cabrini, located on the corner of 181st Street and Cabrini Boulevard, for its generous support for this podcast. It's your neighborhood bistro just steps away from the North Walk of the GWB.
What's up, everybody? It's Octavio Blanco here with another episode of Uptown Voices. This is episode 36, and I'm joined by my brother from another mother, Led
That's
Black,
right.
my co-host.
Yeah.
How you doing, Led?
What's up, brother? What's going on? I'm excited about today's guest.
We have a good guest today, Uptown Voices. I just want to make sure that we all understand. We're talking about all of Uptown. We're not talking just Inwood, Washington Heights. We're talking about South Bronx. We're talking about Inwood, Washington Heights, Harlem, from east to west. And today we have Diana Ayala, the New York City Council member and City Council Deputy Speaker who's representing District 8. It's so great to have you here. How are you doing,
well.
Diana?
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here today.
Yeah, it's a great time to talk. With the year we can see 2026 on the horizon. The year is coming. And you represent a very historic and very interesting district, full of interesting people. A friend of ours, a friend of the podcast, Aurora Flores, who lives in your district. She wrote to me yesterday and she said, East Harlem remains a community of seniors and growing families. It's still a place where folks know each other, greet and hug one another in the streets, ask for your family, your health. It's still a community where folks tell each other where the pantries are distributing foods or the farmer's market in the spring and summer. East Harlem remains El Barrio. And you are from El Barrio. I mean, I know you were born in Puerto Rico, but you have a really, really interesting story. And I think that you personify the grit and determination that New Yorkers have, and the perseverance to reach the levels where you've been. So Diana, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've evolved into the role where you are today.
I mean, purely by accident, to be honest with you. But like you said, I'm like, as you mentioned, I was born in Río Piedras, Puerto Rico. My family is actually from Patillas. And my mom moved us here when I was about 5. To the Lower East Side in Manhattan. And we lived there for many, many years. When I was a teenage, after I had my first son, I was a teenage parent. I moved to the Bronx after having been in shelter and lived in the Highbridge area for quite a number of years, and then up in Sedgwick and 195. But as I was going to school, I was introduced to somebody that was working for Casita Maria, who happened to have a senior center here in East Harlem. And she said, when I start working there, I want to bring you with me. And she did. And so I lived in the Bronx, but I worked in the East Harlem part of the district. I've had family that has lived here because, obviously, El Barrio is like living in the old Lower East Side, because the Lower East Side is no longer what we remember it to be. So it felt very familiar to me. It's always felt like home. And my children have been educated here. My 2 youngest were born here in East Harlem. And I moved here in 2009, only because my 2 younger children, I wanted to be able to go to school and to make it to report card night and, see the school plays while I was working for my predecessor. And so, it's been a very interesting ride. But my trajectory started kind of when I was at Bronx Community College. The woman that I mentioned from Casita Maria, she, my professor asked me, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I wanted to be a nurse, but I'm scared of blood. Like I get queasy." And he was like, "Well, that's not a good idea then." And he said, "Well, what are you good at?" And I said, "I'm really good with people. I love to talk. I love to listen. I love to, problem solve." And he said, "Well, why don't you take up human services services. And so I did, but that, the social work field is very broad. So he said, well, what population would you like to work with? And he recommended the older adult population because I already had children at home. And he was like, you're going to work with kids and then go home to kids, like, try something different. And I fell in love with it. So I started there, working with the older adult population in East Harlem and in the South Bronx. I did some homebound work there as well. And then by accident, through that work, met Melissa Marfiverito, who was a newly appointed council member. And a few weeks after, we met, I was in transition, and she offered me a position in her at her office. I did not want to, work for her office initially. I was very reluctant to do that because, like many New Yorkers and people that are not politically inclined because we're busy trying to survive, we don't understand politics, right? And so what we see is what we know is what we see on TV. And a lot of that is not good news, right? People are getting indicted, they're getting arrested, they're accused of improprieties. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know that I want any part of that. And so I spoke to a couple of people like the Auroras of the community, and other folks who said, you know what, you should do this because, this has an opportunity to open doors for you. And so I took a leap of faith and I went in and I said, okay, well, I'm here now. What do I do? And so I started heading the Constituent Services Division. And all of the people that walked in there had my issues. Like, those are my issues, right? Somebody was on the verge of homelessness. Somebody had, was suffering from food insecurity, domestic violence, child support issues, not being able to pay rent, during the bed bug epidemic, right? Like, people looking for, like, just for help, people looking for somebody to, like, listen, somebody that can refer them, somebody that could hold their hand through whatever they were going through and allow them to be able to see that light at the end of the tunnel. And I was so excited about that because, not because people were going through that, but because I knew that I could be helpful there, because I knew all of those issues well. I knew those programs inside out. I was a product of public housing, the shelter system. My mother, many times we stood on that pantry line and, went home and prepared that mystery meat that comes in the can. And my mother would stew the crap out of it and it would be delicious. And we all remember the pantry cheese, and we will melt it and put it in the coffee. So I have all of those experiences, but then also as I was aging, as I was becoming a young adult, having to secure housing, right? When I was a teenage parent, becoming a really significant tragedy in my early life, right? When my son's father was murdered while I was pregnant, that was very traumatic. And then the postpartum, right?
My
Like, there was,
God.
I mean, like, I could go on and on and on. And I think people sometimes are like, you couldn't possibly, like, have gone through all of these things. And I'm like, oh wow, there's a lot more that I just don't, like, because then I don't want to sound like I'm, dragging it. But and it's not for pity, but rather to say, like, I've been there, I've seen all of these things, and they've all impacted me, and a lot of us have been impacted by these issues, and we've survived it. This is how we do that, right? And I'm gonna help you to get from point A to point B the best that I can, so that it gives people hope. And I did that for a really long time while my children were still small. And then, when Melissa became Speaker of the City Council, by then my two younger children were old enough that I could, start doing more like night meetings and stuff like that, which I really wanted to integrate myself into because I love the community and I understand the issues really well. But it gives it a different lens when you're able to participate in, the resident association meetings and the precinct council meetings and the school meetings, because you hear from the people directly, right? You're hearing from a larger cohort of constituents. And so that really was a lot of fun for me. But what ended up happening was that then Melissa promoted me to deputy chief of staff, and I did a lot of the visibility for her because she was a speaker of the city council, right? She was doing a lot of really important things downtown that benefited our community and could not, provide that level of visibility. So, I got here by accident, but I thank God that I did because, she, I guess, through the course of that time, the 12 years, almost 12 years that I was with her, she had always said, I would love, for the next person to succeed me to be a woman, and obviously a woman of color. And so we should start thinking of, like, who that person is. And then 2 years before she left, she said, I want to have dinner with you. And we went out for dinner, and she's like, I want you to consider running. And I said, absolutely not. I am not, in fact, I am not an elected official. I don't look like an elected official. I went to community college. I was a teenage parent. Like I don't know anybody with money. I am a horrible public speaker. I get really nervous. I don't She was like, Diana, you can do with it whatever you want to do with it, right? But the important thing is that you love the community that you come from. And that is pretty evident in your relationships with, the people that come to our office. And I think that that would be, you will make a really good representative. And so I thought about it for a while, and you know, like many of us, right, I suffer from imposter syndrome even still today, right? And I said, well, can I do this, right? Am I able to do this effectively? I don't want my community, right, to um lack for anything, because I'm not able to produce. And I thought about it for a while, and I spoke to people that, we have a lot of really interesting people in this district that have been around for many, many years, all concurred, and they said, no, I think you would be great. You should, go for it. And so I went for it thinking that I would lose. I was for sure. I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to give it 100%, but I doubt that anybody's going to vote for me. And it was a very interesting period, but I won. I won very slight margin. I was running against the sitting assembly member, and I think I won by 123 votes, which tells you that every single vote matters. Every single
Wow.
vote really does
Wow.
matter.
Every
Yeah.
vote
Right.
counts.
And it was my first time running,
That's
so it
so
was
Every
true.
really,
vote.
it was really cool. And I've been here, since, yeah,
That's
8 years.
beautiful.
And I've been, I was the chair of the committee on mental health, um, uh, of substance use and addiction and disabilities. And then I chaired the now the General Welfare Committee. And in both cases, ironically enough, I chaired those um, committees at a time when, there were things that were really relevant and really, critical happening that kind of tied, itself to the work that we were doing. Like when I was on mental health, the Thrive conversation, right? Bill de Blasio's wife, Charlene, was doing a lot of work around the mental health crisis and trying to figure out how to be helpful. And it
That's
was
right.
very
Yeah.
controversial, but I thank her, because I think it had not been for her, we wouldn't, she started that conversation. She normalized our ability to talk about mental illness and what it looks like. She gave it a face, and I really appreciated that about her. And then as the general welfare chair, we got hit with, a pandemic. We got hit with, a large number of migrants that, migrated here in the last few years, and is the largest influx of, migrants that we've seen coming into any city, right, at this magnitude. So, I've been pretty blessed, and I think that I've done a good job. I've worked really hard. I really believe in the work that we do and the people that we service. And and again, I'm a social worker at heart. So this for me has been like, is something that is unexplainable. I pinch myself sometimes because I can't believe that, little Diana, right, from the project, is a deputy
Yeah.
speaker of the city council, and who the hell let me in?
Well, nobody let you in. You let yourself in, thank goodness. And it's not by mistake. Some people might call it divine providence to have somebody with your experience
That's
and
right.
your ability to relate to your constituents be there and do the work that needs to be done. So, we're really, really impressed by by your
That's right.
story and by the work that you do. And we do have some, and we so that's why we want to invite you here. Want to talk to you a little bit about the about what's going on and what people can expect in the coming years. But before we get into questions, I want to just say to our audience, please subscribe. This is something that we it's free. You can subscribe. We're not charging you anything, and that way you won't miss any of the episodes and any of the great people who we're bringing on. Because the fact of the matter is that mainstream media doesn't do a good enough job about addressing our community, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to address our community, and we're trying to highlight the people like the Deputy Speaker Ayala who are making our community better. So Thank you for being here. I'll kick it off with the questions to talk about immigrants, and you were just mentioning the influx of immigrants that we have in this city, and in particular in our communities. And immigrants are under attack, right? So we want to understand what is there, whether they're documented or undocumented. Immigrants are under attack in our communities. And so, what are some of the services that might be available to people who are vulnerable, whether they be legal, mental, health, or otherwise, in not just in El Barrio, but specifically in
Yeah,
El
I mean,
Barrio? Yeah.
citywide, I think one of the biggest, one of the biggest ways that we can help is to ensure that these folks have access to free legal services to help them better understand, right, what their path to citizenship looks like, whether or not that is viable or not, and allow, each individual the opportunity to make an informed decision about whether or not they would, like to remain here. I serve as a district that has a high, migrant community. That is one of the biggest things that that they come to our office for, is like, how do I seek legal assistance? I want to be able to become a citizen. I want to be able to do this correctly. But I want to share very quickly. We had I in my building, actually, I had a neighbor whose son was arrested several years ago, when I was a staffer, and he was picked up for murder. He was 18 years old. He had come here as his parents were not naturalized citizens, so they brought him here, and then they had two other children that were. And he was arrested. Ended up that it wasn't even him. He had nothing to do, was nowhere near the site, didn't know anybody that knew anybody. Like, he was an innocent kid walking home. Spent a couple of months at Rikers, and then ICE picked him up as he was being discharged and sent him to immigration. And they were going to send him back to a country that he didn't know, because he had been here his entire life, right? He was 18 years old. He came here when he was 2 or 3. He didn't have any family that he knew, in Mexico. And it was a very traumatic experience, but that is the experience of many, of the migrants here, in New York City and the United States. Many of these folks are just families that are looking for a better life, right? That are running away from persecution or poverty, in their own countries. And I tell people, nobody will take I've heard stories from asylum seekers about, things that they've witnessed, and the months that it took to get here by foot, the hunger that they went through, just the trauma of it all, having to leave their family without knowing if they're going to see them. And nobody does that just for the sake of coming to the United States, right? People do that out of desperation. And I think that we forget that there's a human element here, right? And that these are individuals. And should they come in properly like everybody else? Yes, they can, then they should, right? But that's not always a possibility for everybody. And so I think that we need to be a little bit more, open-minded and sympathetic, and try to figure out strategically. I think both parts, right? There should be a bipartisan issue where both parts try to figure out what the best route is for improving, the borders, and allowing folks better access to citizenship here.
And Deputy Speaker, first, I want to commend you. Just from just a few moments just talking, I can see the passion that you have for your work and for the people of East Harlem. And I think the people of East Harlem are very lucky to have you representing them. I'm from Washington. I'm Washington Heights all day, but I was actually born in El Barrio. I was born in Metropolitan
Yeah, that's
Hospital.
my
You know what
city
I mean?
hospital.
So I know. Yeah, yeah. So it's funny. Like, people from East El Barrio, they're fighters. They're luchadores. You know what I mean? I think they got a luchadora in you. You know what I mean? But my question is really, like, with stuff happening federally, right? So I think that a few Republicans broke away, in Congress, so they're still the premium skyrocketing is still, but it looks like it's going to happen anyway, and that's going to affect the people of Uptown. So what are the plans to kind of help mitigate some of that suffering that these
The
hikes are
health
going to
plan, right?
cause?
The health plan hikes you're referring to? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it's interesting because a lot of people didn't understand
yeah,
that that was
yep,
what the government shutdown was all about, right? It's like, we people were put in a position where they're like, do you want health care? Do you want food? And we're
that's
like, what
right.
do you mean? Do you want health care? Do you want food? We need both. Because we know
Yeah,
that, the majority of the folks that are going to go
right,
without medical care are probably going to be Black and brown folks from communities like ours that, don't have the resources. And these are sometimes, most of the time, working individuals that are working poor and cannot afford to come out of pocket to pay these high premiums. And so that is going to have a devastating, impact. I think that, Congress and the Senate, they will put in a very, very difficult, position. And I don't know what the answer to that is going to be. I thank God that we have, we live in a city where we have, access to free medical care. Metropolitan Hospital being one of those hospitals, right? Like, you can walk in there and you don't have to have insurance. You have a toothache, you're having a baby, you have a medical emergency, you should always, feel free to walk in there, and they work with you, right? If you got a bill, because people are like, I don't want to go because I'm going to get a bill. They'll work with you to try to figure out if you qualify for any programs and services. And if you don't, then they will give you a scale down, a fee that you can pay monthly, right? You can pay as much as you can, whenever you can. So it's not, these are not individuals that are seeking, free services. We're making it impossible for them to receive them, even when they are citizens. Even, for us, my children work. I have a child that, is working and doesn't have any insurance. His job, he works on the books, he pays taxes, and he has no insurance. It's ridiculous. He has to pay, and to enter one of these programs, right, through the
ridiculous.
Obamacare program,
It's ridiculous.
and be able to access some sort of medical care. And this is a child that, had cancer many years ago, so he has to continuously go and check up. And I put him in my plan. But after he hit 26, I couldn't keep him, right? And so this is a real issue that is
Right,
impacting American citizens every single day.
that's right.
Yeah, it's a shame, and those solutions, are imperfect, and really, it's up to our federal government to get it together and make sure that, like many other places, that we value the healthcare that we're giving and make it affordable for the people, and God forbid, free, maybe, wouldn't that be great? And it's so unpleasant that we're talking about these basic
Isn't it?
needs, right? Like, we're talking about food, we're talking about healthcare, and we're talking about housing. In New York City, we're in a housing crisis, and I want to hear a little bit more about what's working, what's not working, and what are some of the plans that are in the future. I know that the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act is something that might be voted on sometime soon. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about what
Yeah,
that's all about.
actually we're voting on that tomorrow, and it allows residents to have first right, first dibs. If a landlord is selling, right, it allows the community to purchase, which is really not a unique idea, but it hasn't been mandatory, because back in the day you had a lot of organizations, right? We had a lot of what was called pill buildings, where the tenants would take over the building if the landlord ended up being a slumlord. And then those buildings became HDFCs, and those residents became homeowners. So that it is not a new concept. However, those were very extreme cases, because those are cases where the landlord was losing the building, right? This is more for landlords that are looking to sell, right? And so a lot of the times, we have speculators in our communities that are looking to buy buildings, and then they use, pretty incredible tactics to get rid of the people that live here in illegal ways, right? To have them, they force them basically to self-evict, if necessary, so that they, vacate the entire building and then turn those buildings into market rate apartments. And so this is one of those tools that is not going to generate a whole bunch of, of housing, and it's not gonna, is there aren't that many buildings that would qualify to go through that. but it does offer, a very unique opportunity for the community to get some buy-in in terms of whatever real estate is available in their community, and allow them to stay and to dictate like what those buildings end up looking like. It's been pretty controversial. Obviously, Rebney, doesn't like that. I work with Rebney. I don't think that they're the devil, like many people, would say. I think that they, represent us. They represent landlords, and landlords deserve to be represented as well within reason. But I think that, right now we're building a lot of affordable housing, and people complain that it's not affordable enough. What I say to that is that those apartments are not intended to be affordable for people that need subsidized, housing. Those apartments are meant to be affordable for working individuals that cannot afford to pay market rate, and those apartments actually were in an attempt to replace units that we lost to destabilization many years ago. And so, yes, they're not affordable enough, but there are some caveats, right? If you have Section 8, you can qualify for one of those apartments, and it doesn't matter what your income is. If you have city FEPs, you can qualify for that. If you're in a shelter, there's a carve out for 30% of the units that allow families that are in the shelter system to be able to come into those units and pay 30% of their income. So they're not entirely, out of reach for regular New Yorkers, but where we do need to do more is in creating more subsidized housing for veterans, for older adults, for families living below the poverty line, because those folks cannot, and that's why the City FEPS program has grown as the second largest subsidy program in the city to date, because so many people that are working people cannot afford to pay, the rent on their apartments, and so this gives them a little bit of an aid. So I think that we need to make sure that we, create more of these programs, that we extend that, and really lobby the federal government to extend and put in more money and resources towards Section 8 as well. Because this is really acting as a Section 8 voucher, and the city has had to kind of figure out where we're going to come up with the money to pay for this. But it is a necessary, benefit that we cannot afford not to pay for, because otherwise we're paying for folks to be in shelter, which is 3, 4, 5 times more expensive to do. We also need to really hold landlords that are warehousing buildings accountable. If you look around your own neighborhood, I mean, there are hundreds of units that have been sitting there for years, with the building shuttered, and there's no accountability, there's no penalty for that, and no incentive right now to ensure that those landlords are, keeping the building up to code and bringing those units online. I recommended last year, I think it was last year, the year before, Mayor Adams was proposing a $10 million fund to give to HPD, so that if my landlord, let's say I live in a 50, unit building, and my landlord has 10 units that are empty, but she hasn't rented them because they're in deplorable conditions, and she doesn't have the money because she's a small landlord, that they will pay her to fix those units so that she can rent them up. And I'm like, well, that money, right? If we have money to do that, we should have money to work with these landlords that have been warehousing these apartments, and have some sort of arrangement where, they're giving back, right? As an exchange, 75 of the units go to the families in shelter or low income New Yorkers that are applying through the Housing Connect, lottery system. That's how I think that we raise the number of vacancies. Well, we reduce the vacancy rate, because right now we're like at 1%. So we need more housing ASAP. But people forget that it's not just housing. Subsidized housing as well is very, very critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, when landlords do renovate, they should be proving how much money that they've put into their renovations. Because I've heard stories of tenants who they try to get they get their rent boosted, and the landlord turns out didn't provide any evidence of just how much they put in there. So yeah, I agree that there's so much that needs to be done there.
Yeah, no.
And deputy speaker, like kind of segueing on that, like homelessness and drug abuse, those issues kind of often intersect. And I live in the low 180s, and Octavio lives like a block away, right? So I'm in the zone where On Point is, right? And you know, I've lived in this neighborhood my whole life. You know what I mean? I've had stints other well, but I grew up during the crack era, right? I've seen it all. But to be honest, and I think harm reduction overall, the way it's been implemented, has been just to cause further blight in our communities. Right? I feel like, and I found out from the councilwoman Carmen de la Rosa, right, that this was it was enacted on the last day of de Blasio's term at midnight, right? So to me, if harm reduction was about fixing the obvious heroin problem we have, it would be everywhere. But it feels like it's only in El Barrio and it's only in Washington Heights, right? And like I said, I've seen the how, you know. Okay, I'll give you an example. So I grew up up here, Broadway is the dividing line, right? So if you live east of Broadway, it's poor, more Dominican, more of color. The Broad is more affluent, more money, right? So when I lived on Wadsworth on the hood side, right, and I used to be able to look across to the good side, right, and now I live on the good side, right, but now I see the how I live on that corridor. So On Point has created a heroin corridor where now we just have bands of homeless addicts, you know, pooing on defecating in the street, just making everything worse, sleeping, things I've never seen. I wanted to hear your thoughts on it because I don't believe that harm reduction, the way it has been implemented, has been to benefit us. And I also feel in certain ways it's like a Trojan horse, right? So my mother has lived in the same apartment since '79. She's paid $600 some odd dollars. I think it's about making the life worse for a lot of people here and pushing us out.
Yeah.
And I want to know your thoughts on that.
Listen, my thoughts are all over the place on this one, right? I have family members that have, you know, that suffer from substance use disorder, serious mental illness. I lost, you know, several family members to the AIDS epidemic, including children that were born out of those relationships that died very, very young, as a result of that. Last year I lost my brother, my younger brother, to a heroin overdose. He had serious mental health, you know, issues as well. And I represent a district where obviously, you know, you guys, I think Washington Heights, East Harlem, and the South Bronx are pretty comparable in terms of numbers. You know, we split time, right, between which one of us has the highest number of overdose related deaths. It hasn't been an easy, you know, few years. The intention behind, so there's two things that are happening, right? And once you have a growth in the the evolution of drug addiction, right? We had synthetic marijuana that was like out there and people were like just going crazy, and you know, they were naked out down the street beating people up. And then we were able to get, you know, some legislation to pretty much eradicate it. We didn't get rid of K2. I don't want to say that we got rid of K2 because you can still probably find it in, you know, whatever, but you're not finding it in the quantities that you did. However, as soon as while that was
Right.
happening, there was also a growing amount of fentanyl that was coming into our communities, and we didn't know it because we didn't know what the hell fentanyl was. But fentanyl is a really powerful drug that's used to sedate horses, and they're mixing this product with in your heroin and cocaine, even in marijuana. In some cases,
Cocaine,
people are
everything.
making
Yep.
pills and they're, you know,
Yeah.
lacing the pills with that. And so we had so many folks in our community die as a result of this growing crisis. But it was happening at the same time that the pandemic was happening, and there were just so many different things that were, you know, in the universe of drug addiction and mental health and just, you know, health in general. And so I saw in my district that this was happening. And so I was working with the administration. I'll tell you, On Point was the only organization that actually came out. Like, you know, at that time we were just focusing primarily on like the syringe litter. There was syringes everywhere in my public playgrounds, in my utility, in the corners. Like it was, I mean, everywhere, everywhere. And what I found was that these organizations, which I do believe save lives, I do not believe. I think that the problem that you're seeing, that I'm seeing, and that my community is seeing, is the oversaturation of those programs and services, because we do need them. We do need them. We don't need all of them on the same block or in the same neighborhood, right? They need to have a fairer process. That's
Yeah.
the problem. Because if you had,
Yeah.
if you had 10 restaurants there, you're coming, you're seeing people coming to eat. You had ballerinas, classes there. You're gonna see all these ballerinas coming and going. But if you continue to just oversaturate with substance, use disorder, harm reduction programs, and you're gonna see people that that need help coming and going. And then what happens is that, unfortunately, the drug addicts, right? They know that they have a very vulnerable population there, and so now they take up stake in that community as well, because they want to make clients out of these folks that are struggling. And that's so it's a very difficult issue to tackle, because it requires a multi-agency effort. On 125th Street, what we did, and it has been working. It is significantly better than when I started working it in 2014. We were able to create a community-based group that was made up of sanitation, DOT, the Department of Homeless Services, the Homeless Outreach Unit, mental health providers, Department of Health, the harm reduction groups that were in the area. And we were able to kind of, figure out like what were the issues that we were seeing, right? And then we listed those, and then we created an action item on things that we could do in the immediate and things that we could do, a little bit further down. After we finished all of that, the reduction of the population went down by like 80%. However, there was still a 20% that was out there. That becomes a policing issue, right? If the police are not policing the drugs that are coming into our community, you're going to continue to see that. But the police was redirected towards gun arrests, because we were in the middle of the pandemic, and gun rate, gun crime went up through the roof. So our narcotics division was out there collecting guns. They were not, paying attention to the drugs, and they allowed that industry to grow. So it's very, very complicated. But what I will say is that On Point was the only organization throughout that really helped me, and at least in my experience and my community, to come out to speak to folks, to try to get them into treatment, to help us pick up the needles, to make sure that those corridors stayed clean at all times. Whenever we called them, they came out there, and I had to fight hard to get them some funding to do that, because I couldn't believe that they were giving them money to give the needles away, but the state never created a plan to ensure that that syringe was properly disposed of. They assumed that people would bring it in and then they could get a clean one, and that's why it was called needle exchange. But that's not the way that it works, and we cannot afford not to give out clean needles, because then that leads to a higher rate of HIV infections, hepatitis C infections. So the program that you're referring to now is the safe injection component of the work that they already do. So On Point has already been in my district for a long time. They're not new here, but what they didn't provide was that service officially. If everybody knows that in all harm reduction spaces, people go in and they usually go into the bathroom and they get high, and the staff is paying attention to make sure that nobody overdoses. It was happening in the McDonald's bathrooms. It was happening, in the corner. And so this program, which is very controversial, because people assume that we're enabling drug use. We're not. What we're saying is, listen, we know that people are getting high in high quantities here. We know that because of the needles. We know because we're seeing it. And so let's offer them a space where they could come inside and do it safely if they're going to do it anyway. But while we have them in here, we know, one, that they're not overdosing. Two, they're not using dirty needles, so they're not getting anything else. And three, we can connect them to those services. So it's not more of enabling, it's meeting people where they are. And the reason that you have it in Washington Heights and I have it here is because we happen to have a higher number of individuals that are using in these spaces, and so that's where those services go. And there is a very, I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, Led. There's a very direct correlation between drug use, mental illness, and poverty, right? Those things are all connected, and we have all of those. So it's a work in progress, and I really do appreciate that service is there. I think that the reason that De Blasio did it at the way that he did it was because people were going to say, hell no, we don't want that. But we know, and we've learned since then, that we've saved thousands and thousands of families, of individuals from overdose deaths as a result of the programs. And they're not ideal. I wouldn't. I would never in my mind have imagined that we would need to go to be in a place where we would have to make these decisions, but that's where we are. And until we start cracking down on the narcotics that are coming into our community, we're going to continue to see and to depend on these programs.
But if I may push back, Deputy Speaker, right? the fact that it happened at dead of night without community consultation, right? The fact that Blasio did it as he's leaving, as he's walking out, that to me seems nefarious, right? And it also seems nefarious. There's only 2 in the country. There's only 2 safe injection sites in the country, and they're in El Barrio and in Washington Heights. So the only place in Manhattan where people of color have any kind of power, it's put there. So I agree that it's a problem, but when you selectively just put it in our communities, it feels funny. And then another thing is like, it also feels like it's a addict-centric approach instead of the rest of the community, right? Like, I see the kids in my community live a less of a life, because of the addicts. I see it, right?
I agree. Again, in Patterson Playground in the South Bronx part of my district, I had young men injecting on one side of the bench of the fence, and then the kids were playing baseball on the opposite side of the fence. And I was like, this is ridiculous. This is horrible. Our kids are, seeing things that normalizes behaviors that are not normal. But I think that that's exactly the point, right? The reason that that both Washington Heights and East Harlem have these services is because the provider that was chosen, which was On Point, because they do provide good quality care, is the only provider that does both. And so that's how they ended up in Washington Heights as well. But you're right. But what I do appreciate is that at least in that area that I represent, there aren't any more people outside in the street shooting up. Right? We have issues on the block where they exist, but it's not necessarily an On Point issue. Is really, again, a drug dealer issue, and also problems with some of the local the buildings that are adjacent to that have always historically had issues, and it's just a coincidence that they're all together, and On Point kind of gets a little bit more of the blame. But I'm with you. I don't want my kids to see a dirty, to see somebody injecting. I don't want my kids to know what that is, or that's an option. That's horrible. It's freaking horrible that our kids can tell. My grandson moved to North Carolina, and there were fireworks, and he was like, oh no, that wasn't a gun. I can tell when a gun is shot, like that wasn't shooting, those are fireworks. I can tell the difference. How the hell, at 7 years old, that little baby is telling us that he can recognize the distinction between a fire, it really is mind blowing. But again, there is the disservice that has been done to the community is really that the state has done a horrible job of citing, and they don't do, and neither does the city. They don't do localized environmental impact studies to see how much of a specific program we have in that space. Are they good programs? Are they bad programs? What are the pros, the cons? And then determine whether or not we need more. What they do is that wherever the real estate becomes available, they just plop it there, right, with no regard for the people that live there. And that's what you're seeing in Washington Heights. That's what we're seeing in the South Bronx, and that's what we're seeing here in East Harlem and in the Lower East Side. And there are a couple of other pockets, and there's no coincidence that all of those communities are communities of color, where we have a higher density of poverty. So they need to do better. I think creating those type of coalitions in individual communities is also helpful because it keeps us accountable. It keeps the agencies accountable. De Blasio also did try to do that. He tried to create that system modeled after the one that we created in East Harlem for 125th Street, but I don't think that it ever really took off.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I would like to piggyback on and then we'll move on. But just to say that, how do we as residents who care about the well-being of addicts, but also care about our communities, how do we make sure that these services get expanded into other areas like Chelsea or Hell's Kitchen or Midtown, where those are not places where there are no drug users? In fact, I do think a lot of people travel uptown to our communities, from these
becomes
communities.
a magnet. Yep.
So how do we make sure that okay, we've tried it here, we see that it's saving lives, we're for that, let's do that, let's expand that. How can we make sure that it's not just, okay, we did it, it's done and it's in these communities, and that's
I
it.
think, you also you have to be vigilant. The community boards play a pretty vital role in this as well. Because what I've seen in my district is we haven't opened any new harm reduction programs in my district since I've been in office. Again, I believe in them. I was the chair of the committee that fought for funding for these type of programs. But we haven't allowed the state, because also there's a big distinction. The city doesn't open harm reduction programs. So the state funded programs, and they approve or disapprove. A lot of a lot of the groups that I have been there for over 35 years. They're not going anywhere because they have long-term leases, and it's very difficult to open harm reduction, programs anywhere. So they're not going to try to figure out where else to go. If they're there, they're going to keep them there. So I think one of the ways that we have been successful is in pushing back to make sure. I've had some, like, on the west side, they're like, well, we're getting displaced, so we're going to move to the east side. We're like, absolutely not. We have way too much. Being on top of not only just the harm reduction, not the inpatient, but the walk-in but also being attentive to some other programs that have inpatient programming and have residential programming, because those grow at a larger rate than the harm reduction programs do, and nobody pays attention to it because they look like housing, right? But those they have to get permission through, from the community board. They have to allow the community board to know that they're planning to plant seeds there. We just had two different groups that came in, and I'm like, absolutely not. Listen, again, it breaks my heart because these are my people, and I know that they need us, but we cannot be the only one, bearing the brunt of the responsibility, because it's a disservice to the community, and it's also a disservice to them. We had a whole shelter for people with mental health issues, serious mental health issues, on 125th Street. When 125th Street, tú no podías ni andar, you couldn't walk out the door. There would be, thousands of people out there. They were living out there, defecating out there, having sexual relations out there. You name it, it was happening. And these people that are already triggered are coming out of their building, and this is what they're coming out to. And I'm like, who in their right mind thought that this was the ideal location to put this building? So people are making money out of our tragedies, right? People are making a lot of money for harm reduction programs and for shelters, and they're not doing it in the way that the people that are relying on those services, can really benefit from them and live a healthy life, right? Away from those vices. It's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. Well, thank you for addressing those concerns. You
Yeah,
know,
thank you.
it is hard, and also, my condolences to you for losing your brother. I think that's the reality that we live in, and that's it's a cancer in our society from top to bottom. It doesn't care about socioeconomic status. And frankly, it's no longer. It's not even a party thing either. A lot of people got addicted because they had injuries and they were on painkillers, and then it progressed into something
Absolutely.
else. So again,
But
a
I
really
have to,
tough.
yeah, but it also feels too that when it was us, it was our problem, and then when it's
Yes.
white people, it feels, oh, we have to do harm reduction now, like, oh, we care now. Like,
Yeah.
I hate to say that
It's
part,
the
that's part
it's
of
the
it.
truth.
I kind of
It's the truth.
rankles too,
It's
a
the
bit.
truth. Listen,
It's
it
true.
is what it is. You're not lying.
Yeah, during the crack era, we were just crack fiends by nature, right? This is who we are, right? We just bad people. And now, because there's so many white people falling into addiction, and a lot of white people end up in our neighborhoods from Jersey, from Westchester, and then they become our problem, right? And now we have to take care and pay for them, right? That's one thing that just it bothers. And again, it doesn't feel like, again, I don't believe that it's just because East Harlem and the Barrio have so much addicts. The Bronx has a bunch of addicts. 34th Street, so there's a lot of addicts everywhere. And it does feel like it's done on purpose. It feels like it's a magnet, like, like it attracts. Like you said before, like I tell all the young dudes in my neighborhood, no, hey, let's sell crack on 180th because we got customers, baby. Let's make money. And that's where it really does feel like it's an attack on my community.
Led, I think now it's time to take a short pause so that we can pay some of the bills. We are lucky to have a great sponsor, 181 Cabrini. It's our neighborhood bistro. Both Led and I are just steps away from 181 Cabrini, and we love it. 181 Cabrini is located right there on that corner of 181 and Cabrini, just steps away.
181 and Cabrini.
Just steps away from the bridge. So, yeah, I love it. Led, you and I were there the other night.
Yeah, and we also met there for the first time. You and I, the first time we met, we had like lunch there, and it's my local bar now. Like since I live, you and I both live like right around. It's my local bar. I spend a lot of time there. James Lee, the owner, is just an incredible restaurateur. Right, I think he's a great guy. He's super funny, but like the food is on point. So please hit up 181 Cabrini. It is really one of my favorite spots. 181 Cabrini, pull up. That's my spot. Show them love and tip well. Man, shout out to Deputy Speaker Diana Ayala. That was a very good interview. I have to say that, like, to be honest, she's a breath of fresh air as a politician in a lot of ways. You know, I'm kind of used to like I know everything and I do this and I do that, and it was a different thing, right? It was like, hey, I'm here in consultation with my community, and I'm taking a lot of different viewpoints. So I think that's refreshing. And I think it's another great conversation, brother. Like, you know, I think we're onto something here, man.
I agree with that, and you know, I think it just shows like look at her. She's a part of the community who rose not because of political connections or proximity to power or proximity to money, but she rose out of her experience. Her experience fit the work that she's trying to do, and she seems to be still to this day, connected in a very very close way to the people of her community. And so I'm just really glad that we were able to bring her on board. But to the audience, it shows you just what can happen when you get involved in the community. I keep harping on this. It's important that we as residents, we as constituents, that we show up to the board meetings, the council meetings, that we show up to vote. You saw how she won her election by 124 votes. That shows you that even though we may, not believe it, every vote does count. And let's not forget that it's easy to talk about federal laws and federal lawmakers and even state lawmakers, and those are important. I'm not trying to say that they're not important, but where the rubber hits the road in our lives is at the local level, at the very local level. So it's important that we stay connected, that we attend meetings. They're happening around just in your neighborhood. So please, remember about the power that you hold.
It's democracy or bust, right? So it's democracy or the shit we have now happening with fucking Trump, right? So you know, it's interesting. I was watching this thing on Instagram, and it was a TED talk, and she says when authoritarian regimes stop moving, they tend to set. And we're there. We're way further than people think, and that's why democracy is the only antidote, right? And that's why the community board matters. That's why people getting people out to vote, it matters, because you're either at the table or you're on the menu, and we've been on the menu for far too long, right? So it's like it's important we have a seat at the table. And again, it isn't perfect, right? It is no system that is. But again, it is important to unite and have our voices heard and to vote like we know what the fuck we're voting for, right? I think that's the problem. I think too many of us were fooled by nonsense, and we're in a situation. But again, the only antidote is to keep going, keep voting, and voting people that care. And if you think you're that person, run too, right? Like it needs to be that kind of thing, because what happens is the political system is just calcifying, and people stay in their seats for too long, and they stop caring, and we can't have that, because this is the result of that.
And in New York City, though, I should say that in New York City, the political system appears to not be calcifying. So in New York City, we live in a interesting little bubble where different things are happening. New voices are being elected.
It's the very beginning, though. Let's not. It's the very beginning. Mom Donnie's Schumer needs to fucking go. Jeffries. There's a lot of house cleaning to go. Like,
how does that happen? It happens by us presenting ourselves to take over, so that others who might be having more nefarious, ideas don't fill the gap. So look around, see the fact that we are in an interesting part of our history, our political history, where Uptown is, you know, gaining some notoriety and power. But let's make sure that those who are, gonna be taking over, those who are taking the reins, are the folks that we really believe in, and not folks who have like nefarious ideas and are not looking out for our interests and are just looking out for the money, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'll give you a quick example, but Chuck Schumer again, because I fucking hate that guy. He was on some show, and and he starts saying, you know, he starts saying, "Oh, what happened in Bondi Beach was horrible," right? But then he goes, "Go Bills, go Bills!"
What?
Like this is a fucking atrocity that happened. And you're talking about go Bills, like what I'm saying. Chuck Schumer and the rest of the lot, they're just so out of touch. And again, like I just think that like I'm sorry that I go off on that rant every time, but I'm just so tired of the whole group, and I blame them all for our current troubles, right? Because they didn't stand for nothing, and now look where we're at. Like I just think I keep hammering that home. I don't think people understand where we are right now. In Minnesota on Monday, ICE agents were dragging a pregnant woman through the streets, and then just putting like tear gas on the crowd, waving guns. These are guys that are former January 6ers and former Proud Boys. Like these are our brown shirts. This is the Gestapo. Like we need to wake the fuck up.
Yeah, and it's and they're going to be getting an infusion of cash, and it's not going to let up. So bring a whistle, have a whistle. Don't get involved physically if you can avoid it, but blow that whistle. Make sure that you're alerting everybody. Make sure you're recording, but don't get physically involved yourself. This has been another really, really important discussion, and I'm glad that we are continuing our expansion across Uptown now with East Harlem. We want to make sure that we're also inviting the South Bronx, which is historically our brothers and our cousins uptown. I've heard you. A lot of folks on social are expressing their desire to be part of this conversation, and you're absolutely right. South Bronx, that's part of Uptown too. So
Greater Uptown. That's Greater Uptown.
Greater Uptown. So what do you say, Led? What do you say?
No,
Spread
I'm not ready
love.
to say yet. Hold on.
I'm
not ready to say spread love. No, I'm not ready to say spread love. Hold on. So hold on. So just to show you, again, this may never happen, but as we're speaking, right, I get an alert, right, on my phone, right? And again, this is what we live in now, right? So look at this. $1,776 checks for the military. The president is considering bonuses for many service members. And it's 1776, right?
God.
You would have saying like we have gone to the point of anything this guy wants. Like we live in a shithole country, right? That's what's happening. This is where we're at now. Like Trump decides. It's just so fucking sickening. You know what I mean? It's just so. I'm just so tired, and I really, So someone did a thing. I didn't post it yet, but it was like a guy talking to God on the phone.
I saw that.
Yeah, he's like, "Hey God, it'd be really cool if you did that thing on Christmas. He's like, it'd be really cool if you did that thing." And like everyone knows what that thing is, right? Like because I'm so like to be honest, like. I'm not ready to sign off just because that Rob Reiner shit fucking pissed me off so much. And it's funny, I didn't realize that I even like Rob Reiner so much. I didn't even know I didn't even know I had an attachment to the White House, right? Like Rob Reiner he got killed by his son. Him and his wife were killed by the son, murdered brutally, right? And then this guy has nothing. Well, he has Trump derangement syndrome, and like he has no class, and this is the most powerful man. He's leading our country. That's what I'm saying. I'm just so upset by that. And it's like only a few people are upset, right? Only people on one side are upset. Like his MAGA base, well, that's Trump being Trump. And that's how we got to where we got. Like it's so foul. Like I just can't believe every day a new thing. And again, I'm so done with Trump. And when that thing happens, I'm gonna celebrate because that thing can't come soon enough.
I know
It
you
cannot
said
come soon enough.
you're gonna throw the biggest party of all parties. I'll be there. But I will say this: let's hang in there. I do know that it's tough sledding. It's tough
Mhm.
sledding. Let's I mean, the country has shown us country has shown us something about itself that's really upsetting. Let's try and let the country also now show us something about itself that is redeeming. It might take a while, but let's work towards that. I think
Mhm.
look, it's hard, man. I struggle with where we're at. It's not a fun place to be. But I hear things like, the deputy speaker's history, right? Her
Mhm.
background, the the struggles that she's seen, throughout her life, and she continues to persevere. Let's be inspired by that. Let's continue, because we're New Yorkers, damn it. And New Yorkers have that grit. We have that determination. We deal with so much BS, but we still love each other, even though people say New Yorkers are rude. We're not rude. We just talk the truth. And we also, but you get lost in New York, you'll have a crowd of New Yorkers trying to tell you the best way and arguing with each other about which is the best way to get to where you're trying to go. So I just want to say, like, I know that the situation is bleak. Our leadership at the top level of our country is a cancer, a disgusting human who has no care about about us as Americans. He just has something else going on. But that being the case, we have to maintain our, like, sanity and our hope, and we need to be inspired by the people who we have close to each other. And so I do think that people like the deputy counsel, I think we can, look, she's dealing with so many. It's a thankless job. New York City is not a place that's ever going to be
Mhm.
perfect,
Yep.
but she's there in the trenches, and so are so many other people, from
And
nonprofits to the artists to
and
you and me.
and we won the NBA Cup yesterday, so that's a
Yes,
preview for the fucking finals. You know what I mean?
I
So
know.
that's a good thing. And Mamdani coming in is a good thing. And you're right, New Yorkers, we make it happen, and we're gonna continue to make it happen. But I do believe this democracy is in terminal decline, unfortunately. Yeah. But still, spread love is the Uptown way. See you next episode. Subscribe to the show.
Subscribe. Subscribe. All right. Thank you, Led. Thank you
All
very
right, y'all.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us in this episode of Uptown Voices, brought to you by 181 Cabrini, your neighborhood bistro just steps away from the North Walk of the George Washington Bridge. Use the code Uptown Voices Season 1 for your discount. And to stay up to date on the latest in Uptown, you can follow Uptown Collective on Instagram, Facebook, and X. If you're watching Uptown Voices on YouTube, don't forget to smash the subscribe button and to give us a like. And don't forget, we also need financial contributions from listeners like you to produce, improve, and expand our content. To contribute, please scan the QR code on the screen. Until next time, this has been Uptown Voices.